remember, I'll ask in the end. I'm going to talk about architectural democracy, co-housing, architecture, politics, and things around this. This is not meant to be a very rigid presentation, so feel free to ask whenever. It's more of a discussion. But I want to start with a question. Does anyone know anything about this room? Anyone knows anything about this room?
This what?
This room. This place. Who built it? Who designed it? How expensive is it? Who owns it? You own?
Wasn't it also this Engel who was designing most of this, like Helsinki Old Center, like who also designed the area, like the buildings around this, like church room?
Yeah, the architect from the early 19th.
Yeah.
Actually, it was built by the first female architecture in Finland, who actually was Swedish, but I don't remember her name. But yeah.
Okay. You think this information is relevant? You know that? You think it matters? Why do you think so?
You're going to tell us, I suppose.
No, I want you to think also. It's not a passive thing.
Well, I think it matters because people have this different ideology behind their, like, why they design such houses and what they're supposed to look like. Because, for example, these bureaucratic houses are supposed to look threatening, that people feel small when they go there, and like, it's also a show of power. Like, if you have this message, like.
There's some points there. First of all, I'll introduce myself, but I just wanted to make this topic in your back of your heads. Why is it relevant? I'm an architect and civil engineer from Portugal. I did my first master's in Portugal, and I always thought everyone would lead a life of a multitasking thing, like diversing things. Like when you're kids, you try everything, right? But then comes the facts of life, and you have to be specialized in something. And you drop that somehow. And I tried not to, but of course you end up doing a master's in something, and then comes a second master's in Germany as an architect. But always trying to be this multi-person, which of course I'm sure many of you are, in struggling with that when you become hobbies. And I say this because this is relevant for my path and why I'm also here talking about this. Along this path, I was then invited to make many projects around the world, and including museums, campuses, and big-scale things. And I met a lot of politicians and a lot of billionaires, Aibéo and those kind of rich families. And I got into this realm of construction, building, and I got to know the facts of the everyday life of architecture, of the business industry. And it's a dirty thing, and it's very problematic, and I will explain you why in a second. After that, I came back. I dropped that side of my life, and I tried to make it in a better way, in my view. And I chose this country to do so, and I chose then these approaches that I'm going to talk about today. Why is it a dirty industry? Anyone architects here? Here you are. Alright, do you practice architecture? So, in office, I suppose. Okay. Do you practice?
Yeah, I work for an office here.
Okay, but you sit on a computer and you have meetings. Let's do this and so on. So you're not dealing with the owners.
No, we do have meetings with the clients and so on. Yes.
Do you have anything that you would like to say about that?
Well, thankfully, at least the projects I'm working on is the state of Finland, so they have it more organized. But yeah, I agree that in some places the field is dirtier than in others, and I'd have to say after experiences working in other countries as well, in Finland it's relatively clean. Right. Relatively being the key word, but I do agree. There are
a fundamental fact is that we all live in cities, right? Right? And it composes 60-something% of mankind is living in cities and growing. And and we're going to have maybe 10 billion people within 20 years. And migration to the cities is the biggest migration ever. It's ongoing. It's thousands of people every day going from rural sites to the cities. So the construction is ongoing, and it is the primal motor of a society. If you don't have any houses built new, you don't have growth. That's basically what's associated. But where does all those things come from? And with all the materials and the resources, do we need constantly to build new? Are we growing that fast as we see the construction sites? For example, in Wuhan, in China, where I teach, there are 3,000 ongoing construction sites all the same time. Of course, most of the buildings are empty. Speculation. How do you make new buildings? You drill the resources, natural resources. And we are going back to the climate change or the climate problems that we have. And we're on an extraction society, right? Extraction instead of a circular economy, where you reuse things. Besides us, probably most of this building probably is empty at a certain time or even completely. Yet, maybe on the neighborhood, there will be another building being constructed.
As we all know, China's population is increasing all the time, and therefore you need.
Sorry.
And people's wealth is increasing, as many people know, and the more wealthy people are, the more you like to go to cities. I think 50% or so have moved from rural areas to cities, and therefore it's just natural to build more construct new buildings for jobs and such. But
okay.
on the other hand, cities are. There are resources for all the things because for everything. I'm sorry for my English, but it isn't.
Look,
I don't use the really best language right now, but anyway, my point is that because China's cities economy is just so enormous, and people are attracted to going to move and to work. There will be even more pollution and environmental issues because of the new buildings.
Yes, I'm focusing one part of it.
I hope you get my point.
Yes, I'm going to the next part, which is, of course, this is all quite easy to understand. Okay, there's more growth, and we all know this old mantra: infinite growth is only the mindset of an economic, or a crazy person. We have limited resources, but that's not even the problem that I'm wanting to focus on. Who makes the decisions of resource allocation? That's the biggest point here. Because you're living in the cities, and actually the city is forming your life. How much time I get to work, if there are trees, if there are lakes, if the air quality, if a building is aggressive, if there's corners, it changes my life, the whole feng shui thing, but it does. Who decides that? Can I ever work? Well, sometimes we have zoning planning, we have city councils, people discuss and so on. But are we really participating in that discussion? Do we really know what we are discussing about? I asked you about this room, and I would ask you about your homes, and you could not say the same thing. Maybe you know who you're paying the rent to, but that's about it. You don't know why it is there, who built it, why it was built, how does it work, which materials, where does the money go from, to, and how long it will be there. But then, a room makes a building makes a block makes a city, several ones, and we all live in cities, and then we are asked, as democracy, to decide on matters of the city. Politics, by definition, is decision of the matters of the city. Matters of the city. Polis is city. Politics, matters of the city. So how can you and every one of us decide, make a decision, vote for anyone if we don't even understand the basic concept of a society, which is the city? Okay, there's a problem, right? Yeah, everyone agrees with that? Or everyone has to? You look like you're upset.
I'm not upset, I'm just concentrating.
So, if that's, I mean, of course, we're all busy, right? We all have our things to do, we're all specialized in our different things. And we try to understand the most of it, we read the news and we try to filter the news about that. It's difficult. And it's a lot of layers and it's a lot of data to assimilate. On top of that, of course, you have what I call automatized democracy. So you have all this data pouring out, and who's translating into decisions? Of course, machines. If you have what we call the smart cities for whom? We are completely unaware of what's going on in the backstage, right? So the smart city decides for us. So we are passive elements of the city, which is making it worse. So we can either use the smart cities or the IoT, the Internet of Things, to improve our understanding of the city, or we can just be passive. But on the other hand, is that we are limited, we're cognitive limited. So we cannot assimilate that much amount of information. So we do need machines. So you understanding what I'm getting at? So is there a solution for this? Would you see any way that we could improve our understanding of the cities to act more directly into it, or to go against this passive way of living? No? No? You understand the question? Would you see any solution to fight against this?
Well, first off, I don't think that like the Internet of Things or smart cities are necessarily a way for the actual people living in the cities to understand the buildings in the cities better, because it's always going to be, in those cases anyway, it's going to be through some interface that's designed by somebody who wants to give you limited understanding of the sort of surface level functionality of the building. Maybe, if you know what you're doing and you're sort of tech savvy, you can work to understand it and, hack your smart building. But I think that really it has to be, the people have to be incorporated in the process from the beginning. So you have to design the buildings so that the people who are actually living in them, if you can achieve a situation where they actually understand how things work.
Yeah.
But doesn't that create sort of elitism, because not everybody can choose where they're going to live? That Helsinki city had this official policy until the end of the 90s or beginning of the 20th century, that they built these mixed areas. That there's always a mixture of these more expensive apartments or houses, and then there's these cheap city rental apartments. But they actually made this decision that they gave up this policy, so now they can build just these areas for just wealthy people. And I think this might be, there might be this danger that would be leading in this situation, that there's people who have money who can reserve in advance, pay some advance money that we're going to live in this area and we can participate on this planning.
Yeah.
Because poor people cannot decide, they just go somewhere where the social services point, basically. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I think working with pedagogics in the education system, because from early childhood we just get fed up with information, and we learn how to take a passive role of just being fed the information that people think that you need to take part. And I consider myself a thinking person, and I was never thinking about anarchism through this perspective. And I think if you teach kids or people to just look on their environment and kind of value it or revalue it, and if they're being asked to make better the environment they live in. Yeah.
Do you see that we are all? There's a big point about democracy that John Stuart Mill said. It's about the diversity of opinions. If there's no diversity of opinions, there is no democracy. If there's consensus all the time, well, there is no system. And we are here right now discussing, and we all are going to agree with most everything because we are in a similar platform. And you see these messages that we're talking about, and some other topics also as well, is very difficult to push through to other people in the society. Because, we have common interests. I don't know you most of all, and you come here and you mostly will agree and we'll go back and we're all going to be happy again. But it's not a discussion with the society, you understand? But we have something very interesting that we could use. It's like all these people change, we get old, people change, people go away somewhere. But something stays longer than us, and it's actually the buildings. Actually, the streets stay longer, but a city is longer living than a person. It changes, but we change it faster. So we could actually use that as an asset and say, why isn't the information more attached to the buildings? Okay? And it's happening already. Architects probably know the BIM, the Building Information Modeling, and anyone knows BIM here? What is BIM?
Yeah, we know.
Okay. So there is an ongoing strategy pushed by the government of many countries, which is called Building Information Modeling. And it's basically a 3D model with metadata. So, for example, if I would have this column, I would know who did it or what kind of materials and so on. So I would just click it on the 3D model. So this is important because then architects, engineers, and so on, they can work together in a common platform. They don't have to redo the planning all the time. But of course, there's liability into these questions. Who did what, and has to be tracked. And it's not open to the public. But there would be a huge potential if that information would be shared. But of course, it's also centralized information. Another way, we're growing technology that we can actually do it by ourselves through our phones. We have sensors. We have like 40 sensors here, tracked GPS photos. We could actually make in a couple of seconds a 3D model of this room with photogrammetry, and just taking photos and it makes a 3D model out of it, and then start to add interaction to it. And there you go, and you can start to give information to that 3D model, the same thing. All right? You see what I'm getting? If I could, for example, if I would tell you some detail of this room as she told, Engel built it, if you just add this information, and if you would be here, and if you could access immediately the information that this space gives you, probably we will save time. Of course, this is a service, right? This is something that one needs to develop. But this would change the paradigm of I am spending time in one space and I acquire the information of that space. If I can do so, I can also edit it. So therefore, I could actually make a better information or decision if something is related to that space or around it. And if I, for example, if he decides to put a wall here, you will trust him because he's been most of the time here, right? But maybe he's overseeing something, or maybe he has an interest around it, right? Maybe he wants to, I don't know, divide space and get more money from one side to the other. I don't know. Just give me a bit more capitalist. You cannot, in this way, you cannot trust all the designers, right? They're not gods. They cannot know everything. Any questions so far? or any comments?
I just need to, I'm trying to pull this up on my phone, but Helsinki is the first city in the world that makes a reality mesh model available for free use as open data.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something even in our office we took a look at only a couple of weeks ago, that now you can click on any single building. You don't need a software or anything. I think it works only on the computer on Helsinki, and then you can see when it was built and what kind of building it is and so on, but not all the information.
I can tell you about this model. I worked with the city of Helsinki in the city West on that, and it's a very massive, a very expensive model to make. It's from 2015, so it's already 2 years outdated. It's not up to date, so the semantic of the model is not on real time. That changes everything, because you cannot say the traffic is going to be according to anything. So it's not a bottom-up model created, but a top-down with laser. They went photographed, mixed the lasers, and so on and so forth. And if you want to, it's open source, but if you want to work on it, the models are massive, and you need to be an expert to work on it. And if you want to, you have to fill some papers and so on. It's not that easy. Those are things for the press. It looks great on the paper, and it looks great to compete in Stockholm, which they are always doing this competition in Nordic capitals. In my view, it has to be something much, much different than that. I'm telling this because this is what I'm working on. Of course, I'm making a bit of advertising or engagement, and it's called Architectural Democracy. And we are testing out these things, how to make, how to turn buildings into open source tools. Like how you could yourself create a 3D space and add information into it. And what are the consequences? What are the difficulties on that? So that's what I'm talking about, and why would anyone do that? But this is, of course, one side of the coin. I don't want to be focusing too much. If there are questions or discussion, please tell. But I wanted to also focus on another thing, which is a more basic level, which is the co-housing in cooperatives and renovation. Something that, of course, I'm also involved. That's in very much. And anyone knows anything about co-housing? Nothing? More or less? You know? Can you explain?
Look at me.
Yeah?
I think we all know something about co-housing. So you share something, they have better rules, and hopefully you make together.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Alright, so what I was talking about before, about the diversity of opinions and discussion, and you were talking about if we learn when we're kids to be investigative or even able to discuss matters, we are not going to do so if we are living in little boxes in our apartments. Again, the designers are doing that not because it's the best for the community, but it's the best to maximize profit of a certain few. It's not a conspiracy, it's just normal. I've done this many years. The smaller the room, the better, because you can charge the most. But that undermines the complete social aspects of living together in the community. So you know that actually 20 years, as happens here in Helsinki, so you know, 20 years besides a wall, that thing, and you never engage with your neighbor. And you know better the TV star, which is not your friend. But the person who could help you, you ignore him or her all your life. So one of the ideas of improving discussion, and therefore improving the exchange of ideas and ability to discuss, and therefore also to inform oneself and to inform others, is to actually talk with people. Talk, and at best, with the people that you have to live around. Because they share a common space where you have to decide things. And this goes back totally to the politics of a city. The decision-making of a location starts in the conflict of my neighbor and me. And even the girlfriend or boyfriend. You know, that's where we start. If we're not able to discuss at that point, how can we be asked to talk on a higher level of an old city? And we see everyone agrees that our politics are going on a very bad Trump-like direction, right? So in this approach, in this framework, cohousing is a good alternative. It started in Denmark in the 1960s, the modern cohousing, and it's already 8% of the housing of Denmark. And we have already some examples here in Helsinki, Maltatal, for example. And the basic concept is it's not a hippie village. It's not you go there and sleep all together or something like that. No. It's you have your own apartment, your own things, but you have very large and attractive common shared spaces. For example, a big room for meetings, for doing your even small business, a big kitchen, big laundry, workshops and sauna. Sorry?
Those examples we are not talking about, they are all occupied housing in Aibéo. So they are not rental housing,
I didn't understand. Yeah.
At the beginning, you were talking about rental and all occupied housing, or
No?
someone was talking, I don't know. You were talking about city apartments and differences between certain housing areas. So my point is here that most of the housing projects we have in Finland, they are only for regular people who can afford it. They are all occupied housing, so they are not rental apartments. I think that's one good case.
I don't really understood. But maybe you can comment.
You mean that they are like people own the houses? Yeah, it's not like occupied, but it's bought.
Yeah. I'm talking first about. Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to continue my comment. Traditionally in Finland there was these like workers like houses like where people had their own like apartments for the family or for the worker, and then they had this kitchen together. There's a few left. There's one block left in Tampere, like museum block, and also one in Helsinki. But I think the problem where people left them so eagerly was that there was no like these modern facilities, that people went with the running water and with the warm water and with the like electric stoves and whatnot. So people went with this that it was actually like contradiction to this like workers' housing was this alvar-aalto and this equality for everybody, hygienic like working class like apartments like for families. So like it's big like that. I think people in Finland might have this big like bad taste from these common houses because they were really small and they were really like, how to say, like not really modern. Or maybe they were modern in the 1890s, but they weren't modern in the 50s or 70s.
I can explain why that happened. And that's two things. The co-housing is all very nice, the starting point. Like people get together, they form a cooperative or not, or association. They build a house together with all these ideas, and either they buy or they rent or make a cooperative or those sort of things. But then as one of them dies or one of them moves out and then sells to other people and it starts to sell or rent it, that's the point where it gets tricky. Because that's what I'm going to, for the co-housing, to the cooperative side. And not all cooperatives are the same. In Finland, we have a lot of housing cooperatives, a bunch, but they exclude the fact that the people who are living there can choose who's coming in. And this is wrong in my view. I hope somebody disagrees, so we have a final discussion. But in many other countries, especially Switzerland, the new co-housing projects, cooperative co-housing, they say if a person moves out, the new one that comes in has to be agreed by the people living there. And this is important because that deteriorates. If you don't know who's coming in, you don't know how is he going to, or he or she, take care of the place. I mean, it can be just a business guy who never puts his feet there, so he doesn't care. You know, he maybe doesn't fit the rest of the community. Yeah. And also another thing is that cooperatives are different models, and the best ones, in my view, is the ones who are shares. And the shares are not transferable. So if you move out, you have to give back the shares to the cooperative. So there is no, in a sense, there is no investment, no profit in getting a house in a cooperative. And that makes the house very, very cheap and very affordable and not according to the market speculation. You have a question?
Yeah, more or less a comment on this, the current trend in Europe, in cities at least, because co-housing, I think, at least as architects, we've been selling it as the future of living. Get a smaller flat for yourself, but a better living room, or you don't have to be stuck inside your 30 square meter because you have a kitchenette, you can have a proper dining area and so on. But if anybody's interested in the effect of architecture in modern society, there's this blog called Failed Architecture, and they recently covered this commodification of the co-housing problem, with especially a London perspective, but I think that applies to any city in Western Europe really. I've lived in Norway and Sweden, and co-housing movement there, at least not the traditional Copenhagen style, but the modern Nordic post-90s, post-2000 co-housing style, where a traditional developer comes and says, hey, suddenly we've become all socially, environmentally responsible. They get on board one or two really sort of path-breaking architecture firms, and they sort of brand this whole idea of something community built, something bottom up, and they sort of sell it even more than they would sell a regular housing project. And I find that very problematic, and that's what is actually being allowed in the Helsinki market, because this new idea is being forced to fit into a very old market model for real estate. And I think some of the ideas that you are proposing maybe are actually overcoming the problem, because as it exists today, the co-housing in Nordic countries at least is very problematic. It's not at all the social level and that architects, at least from my perspective, think it is.
The cooperative system of housing is started in the 1900s, and actually the Finnish immigrants to the USA were the first ones in USA to make housing cooperatives there. Even in New York, they had 20,000 dwellings in Manhattan, which of course in the 60s, this was the 1920s. In the 60s, they of course blew up because too much capitalism there to withstand this pressure. But, as I said, in the 1900s, that was more this direction of co-housing. Then it changed after the Second World War, and now it's managed by Aravad, I think. There's this housing which owns half of all the rented flats in Finland, which is a big sum. But of course, again, it's still completely attached to the market. So personally, instead of just buying by the square meter, he buys by shares, which corresponds to square meters. And there is of course shared spaces, but nowadays it's like the sauna in the basement and the laundry room. So the co-housing idea is not that attractive. And it could be also attractive, but then again comes the cooperative side, which is not there. On top of that, so to remember, so co-housing, everyone agrees, or hopefully not, that would be a great thing to have a working community, that people talk with each other, help each other, right? And then a cooperative that enables that this situation can withstand the pressures from the outside market, but also changing of the people, so you know who comes in and goes out. But there's another point, and that focuses what we talked about before: renovation. A lot of the new co-housing things that you see here in Helsinki are new buildings, and the reason is not because there is not enough buildings to renovate. No, because legislation and prices are far easier to build new, probably know also, to build new instead of renovate, especially if you're doing co-housing, which you have to say to anyone who gets on board, this is going to cost this amount of money. And renovation, the prices can change much more than if it's new, because you can calculate it much easier. So what we're seeing then is either a destruction of our heritage, just take away the old buildings and put new ones, or empty buildings and make a new one on the side. Both of these strategies, I hope everyone agrees, if not, please say, are wrong in terms of usage of natural resources. Right? So if you have an empty room, as we have, empty rooms everywhere in the city, and that people certainly in need of spaces, we should optimize that. Any questions, Bana? Any comments?
Not just empty rooms, empty apartments all around the city center, empty for years.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about the legal aspect in Finland because I have this understanding that it's regulated what size of apartments there need to be in a house so that you can build it, but they're not very noticeable like this. But I think it also makes it more difficult in Finland to give different kind of living spaces for people because it's regulated that we have to have this and this many of this size of apartments in this.
Yeah. So there's zone planning.
Zone planning.
The city decides, and they just decided again now for the area Sornainen, and they decide the percentages and so on. And it's all fine. This has been something that was a big battle for a couple hundred years ago to make the cities better distributed. But then, of course, you do it and you create those regulations, but then you leave it for the next 30 years or something to the market to develop itself. So what happens is again a deregulation of it. So if which can be good, but as we see, there's gentrification. Everyone knows gentrification? Gentrification is when, for example, some area is run down, like is a bit poor, or like an old place of the city, and suddenly the hipsters or the art community come and start to buy and turn it into Starbucks, cafes, and so on. And all the community that was there just disappears, goes into the suburbs because they cannot afford. This happens almost every city center in all the old cities. So the real people who used to live there with their traditions, what we call the intangible heritage, right? So the music, the songs, all these things, they move away from the space where that belongs, and comes another kind of people who brings mostly just, what we know.
I think one really interesting question is that in Finland there is basically no discussion that whose responsibility is it that the space is in use. Like for example, in France there is a legislation that if spaces in the city have to be in some kind of a use, and if somebody owns a building and then not use it, then you can use it. And also in the Netherlands in the beginning of 2000 there was this legislation that you can take any space if it hasn't been used in half a year. And then there came this new market for, there was companies who were actually renting spaces super free because the owners didn't want the kind of time period to be too long that the space is not in use, so you could actually rent really big spaces for really cheap, and it actually created new cultures. Mm-hmm. But I think in Finland people don't think that if you own a space that you are responsible that it's in a use. Yeah. So you can just keep it empty and it's not your fault. Nobody can say that you did something wrong. And I think that's something that we should really because in Finland there hasn't been cities for more than 100 years, so of course we cannot know yet, but I think that's something that should come in discussion. That of course if a city owns, if Helsinki city owns a space, then the city can have the responsibility, but if a private person owns a building,
but all these things that you're saying, they are fundamental. But and we can inform people here, because we are in a space and we're talking about it. If we are not talking about it, nobody knows about it, it's just a piece of text somewhere in the website. And that's what I'm talking about. This legislation actually exists, and many politicians force that. It's also in Helsinki. For example, there's one that's probably going to pass, which is called, I forgot the name. But to map the places which are empty and being used, and for example, for governmental buildings, they will start to have a sensor in the doors So you could actually get a code if you can just apply.
But it's also only for public.
Exactly.
But not for like if a company has an office building and it's not in use. Like
exactly.
Nobody can say anything.
Any more comments? Thoughts? I mean, this should be a discussion, right? Anyone disagrees? What should we do about this?
There's been all this talk about like, I have a good example from Helsinki. We have organised. It's been already around for like 25 years. Yeah, which is like, renovating old buildings and renting them out for free living.
Yeah.
And and people who live there, I live in an house. We choose the inhabitants, and like the rents are really cheap.
That's good.
And it's like based on like income and like like you have to have a low income to get the apartment.
Yeah.
And like homeless time and so on.
So you're working on that?
Huh?
You're working on that, or you know it?
It's in Helsinki. It's already been like around for more than 25 years. Started out with squatting, and it's working very well, and it's a good model that people could use for starting out their own projects. And like the houses are renovated together with the people living there.
Well, you should give me the name of Oransi.
Yes.
Right.
I think there's more people who would want to come there than it's possible to go.
Yeah.
I mean that it's really like.
But it's a good model that could be used more, and like also we are like in very good relations with the city, and they are actually like contacting us and we have like a house that
But I mean that there's a lot of people who would want to like live in a place like that. That it's actually really tempting for many people.
Yeah.
Do they have a lot of shared common areas? And how's that working out?
Question for you.
Well, do they have a lot of shared common areas? And how's that working out?
We don't really have like, it's like mostly, well, the house that I live in is just like one room apartments. Everyone has their own kitchen. It's like because we haven't like designed the houses. It's it's like old, mostly like old workers' buildings.
Yeah, that should be
That
changed.
have been renovated. So we're like stuck with what we have. But we have like one common shower and so but we work together, renovating the house and like taking care of the garden and so on. Like have good relations, like we know who lives there and like.
Do you have like continuous projects and stuff?
Well, we've had a lot of renovations going on there, like taking care of the yard, and we built a hen house, which is finished now.
I had it's kind of going back in the conversation, but I had a thought on common spaces or people sitting in their lonely apartments. That in Sweden before we had words for church gossip and square gossip, and I can see that a lot in smaller communities or even subcultural groups. That there's a lot of gossip and like not a lot of constructive conversation. I don't think people are used to a lot of constructive conversation. And that's why, like, I'd like to question how we are mature to have common spaces again. Like, I can see tools of information today, like the internet being an adhesive to the conversation. I think also, like, maybe we are, because we had that kind of problem with common spaces before.
Yeah.
So I want to know if people think that we are mature to share spaces today, because I feel that there are some benefits of being a faceless person on the internet in a conversation.
Yeah.
And you say things that you wouldn't say in front of people who are that you have relationships to.
Okay, 2 points then. One is from the words of Yangel, which is one of the main urbanists from Copenhagen. And he says, if you want more cars in the city, just build more roads. If you want more people in the city, just make more sidewalks. If you want more bicycles, make more bicycle paths. Just provide with a platform. In 10 years, it will happen by itself. It's called human nature. We adapt to a situation. So if you plan a city according to what you want it to be, it will become like that. It's just a question of patience. So I'm pretty sure that if you would make more discussion places, more shared spaces, in the beginning might there be a lot of problems, but it goes better. But let me just put the second point, the privacy point. Privacy, if you look into the history of privacy, which is very much related to, of course, housing and architecture, it's a changing concept. Historically changing, and now dramatically changing, even faster. I know of the cat of my supervisor, and that should be something that I should never know if it was 20 years ago, right? So, and what is in 10 years' time, we don't know. But probably it's not going to be that private. And again, there's the most of the people in IT, they say, forget about privacy, you don't have it, just get used to it. We don't have it anymore. We're all over the place. Also. And that's also a risk or a potential. Yes, what is it?
Well, try to make my point very up here. You've been studying cohousing models in Denmark and Sweden, I think. And many of those projects are roughly rental housing. I also visiting Sweden, and many rental housing projects is a place of also is used. So how can we make that kind of development happen in Finland based on your understanding? What's so different in Sweden and Denmark when they have rental cohousing projects? Who should we contact? The city, ARA, building developers, how to make them interested? People that said, but it's a small scale. But we talk about bigger scale.
Yes. Well, I wish I could give you an answer. I'm doing this Svarta Scholar project, which is doing that. And I don't know all the details about Swedish and Danish model. I do know a bit of the Finnish model, and as I explained, the rental process is not a good one because you leave and there comes a new one. So I would, and legislation is changing. I don't know of the co-housing part of it's because it's not so generalized. There's a specific legislation for that, which only a few construction companies are aware of it even. So I would, in my opinion, we just have to share the news and engage more people to do that until it becomes even more legislated, more into normal habit. For example, in my view, would be you cannot have a person moving in without a consensus of the housing cooperative. That would be fantastic. But you know that's easy to do. And elections are coming up right now, right? Just talk with the guy you're voting and say, could you put this into the discussion table? And explain why. And we need housing cooperatives to choose who's coming into the building when somebody moves out. and explaining why it's important. The community, the decision making, the whole process. And then you vote for him, and you will try to put that on the discussion. So that's, it's not the perfect system. Everyone agrees. I don't know. But we have to work with what we have. Right?
Or the other ways, what she was talking about is like how this Dutch people, how this law became that you can actually take this empty building. That it started with the 70s squatting. People were just taking the houses. It was like the law was changed through the direct action.
Yeah.
Or else it started with the squatting as well. I don't think you necessarily have to go to your politician who has no guarantee that the politicians don't have to keep their promises after the elections. I mean that there's no law with that, so they can promise now whatever they want.
Again,
but the point is that there's also this other way that you can just like for example, this Oranssi was like the position was gained through the squatting.
Yeah, but again, I gave an interview 2 days ago about activism, which somehow I'm labeled as now. And they, what is the best way to do something, and there's no one answer. It's just a multitude of things that you can do, also for that. I mean, there's an amazing squatting example just happened now in London, a millionaire's house. Just got occupied. Of course, they're going to trash them out. But again, just the fact that they did it raises awareness to the fact that there's empty buildings all over the place, and while people don't have anything, and still we're building new ones somewhere. So this has direct consequences to our economy. Of course, it's great for the economy, but not so good for our world as natural resources limited, right? So this is something that we should, in every possible way, either politicians or just putting a banner, go outside and manifestate, or talking, or doing projects. It's just a question of everyone doing a little piece, right? Like we are, many of us are.
Yeah, I just want to say one point that is for me quite obvious, which is that somebody here was saying are people ready to live together in a co-house? Well, a lot of us do it out of necessity, like a lot of people, especially students, young people who have low income, blah blah blah, everybody lives with roommates, and in lots of situations actually it works so that people have meetings and they decide themselves who is going to be the roommate, and they share all the kind of spaces, even the sleeping spaces. This happens all the time, It's not something like
totally
new and shiny projects that we don't have. Like it's how people live, I guess, everywhere, and also in Finland, and especially in the cities.
Well, it's not everywhere.
Well, not everywhere.
There's an age group there because from the maybe 18 to 20 somethings, that out of economic necessity you do that. But then the next step, at least in our heads, is get a partner, move into some isolated corner, and then the community living is broken down, right?
But I don't know. I'm not sure because we're different kind of. I'm sorry, but we are of course different generation with different kind of I'm saying we as 20-something, but the economic prospects are different, the culture is different, so nobody knows what's going to happen in 20 years. Maybe then the 30-somethings, 40-somethings are still living in the communal houses, either out of economic necessity or because they like it. So it's not, I don't know, I mean, it's of course age group question, but I think it's interesting to see what's going to happen with this kind of culture.
Yeah.
It's already happening in especially in bigger cities in Finland, that there is people who intentionally want to live together, and they have they find some big house or
eco villages, for example.
No, or just a normal house, but they make some kind of common rules and then choose if somebody wants to move out, who's gonna move in. But I think also because people don't necessarily have nuclear families anymore in the same scale that in the past. So also I think it's interesting to see how this apartments made for two to four people that we have been building since the 60s, that how are they gonna fit in this kind of new living structures?
That's easy going. I'm sure every architect would agree, just take some walls down, you can create a part of it is amazing.
But the thing is that, like, if they are not new apartments, and then somebody is living in the, like, behind the wall, you cannot take it down if somebody is living there. Yeah. So people actually need to, like, discuss, and, like, if they are trying to find a new place, like, then it's not kind of systematically possible to do that, because always somebody's living in all those, like, places. So,
yes.
So yeah.
Let's not get too narrowed down into one problem of co-housing, right? I mean, we're talking about the broader topic about architecture and politics. That's of course one direction one of the possibilities, or one of the situations we have. But architecture and cities and politics, it's all about scale. I mean, we as people can communicate in a group of 30 people. 100 is already tricky. 1,000, it's impossible. And 1 million doesn't work. And a 5 million country like Finland there's still some kind of a democracy going on. As you know, of course, with corruption, a country with 200 million like the USA, of course, it does not work. And it's completely clear and of course the scale matters. We cannot know everyone's opinion, we cannot even process it, and we cannot make a wise decision upon that. So the communities are important, and it's low scale, but then we also have to be linked to the bigger scale that is outside. So that's why many times I'm very critical about the co-housing projects. We are detached out of the externalities or the outside, and you see that throughout history that happened many times in 40 years, and in all these social experiments. Kibbutz was one that's still alive in Israel. There was all these social experiments from the 19th century onwards, also especially in the USA, where they just built. Let's build a factory and all live together, co-housing, community thing. But then as it passed one generation, not even that, or just they had to exchange with the outside, it just went out.
Yeah, well, I'm going to think that people who is living together have a right to decide who is living.
Sorry?
The people who is living, like in co-housing, are deciding who is living. I think it's really thing which is kind of can create a lot of troubles. Like, for example, some people are living in a racist community and they don't want some other people going in. Some people don't like old something, or don't like people who have psychic problems or something. And it's really tensing me because I have met already things like that, and I wouldn't really think that, especially that the right through law, I think it will be like totally bad thing to make. But of course, like a community which is living, it's really nice, but you know, we cannot make everybody like to do the same. It's actually, I was more thinking about that if people are already living, it's really nice thing to have that they can make decisions, even if they are different. But they didn't really choose to live together, because actually we didn't choose to live together at all. But we do. But we have to deal with each other anyways. Doesn't matter if we like or not. And I think the thing is to try to have some property already in the existing house.
Does anyone else respond?
Just one very, very simple thing. I am vegan. I want to decide to my community house and vegan house. I don't want meat on my tongue. So, you know, these kind of things should be valuable, you know, and then also there are other possibilities of living. So there's not only one community that lives together, there are many communities, and there are many possible rules. So if you don't fit one community, you will fit another community. That's the point, that we can get together with those that we actually share values and style of life and things that we like to actually enjoy living together. And not just try to get along with whoever comes, because it's not the style of living. I want to live with somebody where I can feel myself, I can be myself, really. You know, move the way I like, and also other people know that. So, yeah,
two vegans get along.
it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that two vegans get along, but for me that is a deal breaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I understand this point of choose who you live with, but there's been a lot of discussion lately about these social bubbles. So how do you ensure that there is enough diversity in your surroundings so that you don't get encapsulated with people who are like-minded and only your people as a task? Do you have any?
I didn't really understand the last question. That's what I was going to.
Like, do you know if there are any ways to ensure that there is enough diversity in your surroundings to see people who have different viewpoints of your own?
Well, yes, of course, the third point is valid also.
Yeah,
if you are,
we are not doing like social bubbles on the internet. We are not constructing physical bubbles.
Yeah, I know. But that's one problem, right? If the group has to decide who comes into the group, it's going to be like close the borders, right? The wall, and you're going to exclude people. But on the other hand, if you let everyone in, they will be isolated no matter what. Maybe they will create smaller groups, but you see the result. So there has to be some kind of a balance. But I think the question again is here the scale part. I mean, if we're talking about your country and you close the borders, that's a problem. That's you really excluding yourself from a larger group. But if you are closing in a smaller communities, then the next door you'll have a lot of opportunities. It's not that. Well,
I'm sorry, I have to disagree that you'll have a lot of opportunities in the next door. I've lived in 4 Nordic cities in the last 7 years. I'm not a Nordic citizen myself. I cannot vote to affect whatever. The only time I've not had a problem, and all these are like, you know how the housing market is in the Nordics, and all these are places where I've tried to sort of, everybody would like to live in a cooperative and try to respect each other's spans, but I like living in collectives and so on, and not once have I had an open application on a Facebook group accepted saying, okay, you can come to our collective. I've had like discussions, interviews, whatever. It's only the housing companies which are not allowed to discriminate by law who have offered me houses. And I've had to take even like really bad student apartments because, well, that's the only way I could get a roof in a Nordic city. And now finally I live in a collective after trying for years in Stockholm and Bergen and wherever because a friend of a friend knew somebody. And it's still not an open market thing. And that's the sort of thing that can very easily happen. We don't want a city that's ghettoized. And okay, it sounds very nice. Yes, of course, everybody has to agree and everybody, okay, but sometimes I think we need these lifestyles we are where we are today because we live in this, well, the red-green bubble, basically. We're all agreeing and, okay, like I could live with somebody putting meat on, I'm a vegan myself, somebody puts meat on my pan. I would be okay with it if I'm somehow expanding my sort of, like, and that happens sometimes only if you're forced to, especially if somebody's new to the country, if everybody is actually even allowed, especially even with this thing with Kela. Now, 3 of my flatmates are students, and they probably have to move out from the collective because Kela says they're going to calculate our income, all 5 of us together, and because 2 of us are working, that income's already enough for the 3 to lose all their aid. So the law is actually not promoting cohousing, it's actively going away from cohousing. And I don't think we should write more things into it saying, okay, you can actually even more like, okay, we'll only take people who have so much money because we'll make sure the rent is paid. Well, I don't think that's the way, I'm sorry, but as a person who has experienced this over and over again, I have to say that this is not something I'm very positive about.
You want to say something?
Yeah.
No, I'm done.
Yeah, just that I think it's super important that people are able to choose who they live with. And it's really nice to live in a bubble because like people who you live with like can become like your family, and it's important that people choose choose that, and I think the only way
collective and non-profit.
a very like a racism, for example, is a problem in society, but there's other ways to get rid of it, and like people are interacting in other also in other environments than their homes.
Let's make pluralism outside of home, because at home it does not have to be so present.
Yeah, I agree with the people on the couch. And I wanted to continue with this idea of social bubble. That if I continue with this, this idea or this example of yours, this veganism, that I think, well, maybe not so nowadays, not so much anymore, because we live in sort of quite fragmented culture, or there's lots of different subcultures. But I think it has been really hard to be vegan when the mainstream culture is like sort of pushing this, that if you're like somehow contra something, or if you're not in this average, like whatever, which is the image of the normal person, you get enough of this like propaganda anyways everywhere. So I think the home should be the place where you can be just yourself without this like the main stuff like coming onto you all the time. This is just a vegan example, but there's many of these. You mentioned racism or whatever, so there's many of these.
I
see that this is totally a problem that you're applying for this kind of like, if you're talking of course of an apartment scale, it's not like a building scale, I guess.
Yeah, my point was, the speaker seemed to suggest that we should allow it on a building scale. That is where the problem is.
Kind of the housing cooperative in Finland is not really common. Like this taloyhtiö in Finnish, the most common thing you know, that people actually they own the house together, but then when the housing, when it's not like co-housing, people don't know each other, usually they kind of retreat into the bubbles, into the quarters, into the apartments. So they actually forget about what the cooperative means. So this is like the situation where people are not choosing the people are coming in the apartment house or the public buildings, they only own like the shares. Yeah. That's what's now in Finland is happening. It's the reality. You don't know your neighbor, even though you own the part of the building is yours. You don't know your neighbor. Yeah. And that's because you're not choosing it, it's not like a community. That's totally what's happening. People are in the corners, and I myself, I don't own my apartment, but I have discussions with people who own their apartments. They don't understand what the taloyhtiö is. They don't know they are the taloyhtiö. The housing cooperative, like if they pay for something, the cooperative, they pay for themselves. They don't understand the kind of the system that they're part of it. They pay like hundreds of thousands of euros to be a part of it, but they don't understand how it works. Yeah. Because it's not a community, it's just people who have the, on paper they have a community, they own it together, but they don't have data, because they don't know it, they kind of forget about it. About the structure and what the cooperative.
I want to also share an experience from at home last night, and this law of like in the house. You know, when all people living in the house are actually can find a cooperative and can decide where the tax money they're paying going to work in wage. And people say to do that because it's become cheaper to pay the money to the private company. And it's kind of really nice things actually that we don't know that neighbor. We didn't know that neighbors in my family. We didn't know them. We didn't choose them, but we went out to our yard and started to decide, okay, we will pay this money and we want the gates. And probably some of the people who have a car want the electronic gates. And they say, okay, we want the electronic gates, so we pay a little bit more because we want it to work quite clean. And it's kind of a nice thing to look like. I understand this point of living together. It's really important to have a comfortable in your apartment, but it's not only because like I'm living in the flat, but maybe I'm living next to you, and it's probably doesn't matter what in my own house.
But community housing also means shared kitchen, shared spaces, shared dining rooms, as we spoke about. So I don't think that it's like a community neighborhood in all Or like people living sharing common spaces. If you're not sharing common spaces, that's another topic. I think.
There is different kind of spaces we are sharing. Like there's spaces like if we're living in the same street, it's kind of tricky to decide who will live on the old street. And we are sharing a street, we can make a decision to just live on that street, on our former space. And in the smaller thing we can choose them to just like belong to that. Like, but still, I'm really against you like isolating. So I want us to go and knock the door and meet your neighbor. I don't know. It's also kind of Finnish culture. It's very close to culture.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but I was saying that it's a prevailing culture, and it's in the buildings where you don't choose, which I have no opinion right now if you should or should not choose, not be able to choose. But the prevailing culture is when you are not choosing, you don't know them. There's random people. It doesn't happen. So the like changing the culture, I don't know. It's like within the parameters that they're now kind of living in house. I don't know. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, I just want to say about these like towers here, these houses that people own together. And I don't think, honestly, that if those people could choose themselves who to rent these big block houses and these apartments, then it would give any more this idea of community to these people. Like, I'm sorry, I'm very negative about this, but I think it would just be like discriminatory, like people were saying here. Like the thing that would help with these houses, because when I think about like these houses, what kind of common places they have common yard for kids. So the kids in the house are playing together. Especially in the earlier days, you have this common place and then the kids come together and play. So if and the more there is common places, when there is a grill on the yard, there is a room you can use. Like for instance, my grandmother is living in this kind of house, and my aunt my aunt has a project of having a gym in the basement and blah 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 blah. She knows all her neighbors. She's very involved, and the more they have these shared places there, which they do, which is not like very much, but the more they have this possibility of using these shared spaces, the more they know their neighbors, the more they do stuff. So it's more about like building these houses so that there is possibilities of using these shared spaces other than this sauna and this yard and this laundry room, but also building, I don't know, this whatever, like how we call it, which is in every old house where they used to have these rooms where they had like, I don't know, billiard board or something, and teenagers would go hang out in the basement, kind of stuff. So I think the way to do this in the designing point of view, to do these more communal, is to build these communal spaces and not change these laws so that people can choose, because I don't know, if my grandmother or my aunt could choose who to rent the house, there would not live a single Roma person there. There would not, you understand what I mean?
And that's the comment of discrimination.
Talking about this living in one flat together.
My point was about the living in one flat.
But also we're talking about these communal houses.
What I agree with you here.
Yeah, and I would add just to what you said, activity is what we need to base our common spaces on, because people connect based on activities, as we very well know. And as you just described, the more activities they can do together in common spaces, the more close they will be to each other. That's very true.
But that means that, for example, ageism or ableism will play crucial ageism and ableism, because those really restrict activities. Because this whole idea of putting it all on a cooperative scale will also mean that you sort of outsource any redistributive justice onto the nuclear level where it's uncontrollable. And it's all based around an idea of choice that's incredibly neoliberal in itself. And it's just a fact that in such an idea of choice, some people would have way more choice. And that would be a middle-aged, middle or upper-class working white person with a specific, very moral lifestyle and the rights of life choices that could choose all of the communities. And then there will be more and more attributes and qualities to people that can choose less and less of those communities. And that's exactly what we need. Yeah, but can I add something? you have two extremes, right? Either we can choose or not choose.
And we're talking on different scales.
And also different scales, but that's exactly the point. We don't, and that's what we used to nowadays with democracy, is either yes or no. And there's a whole array of grays in between. I mean, that's the whole point we are missing out in the democracy nowadays, is that there's a solution in between. We don't need to go, everyone decides or not. We might have percentages. We might have, again, a zoning part that this percentage can and it not. We can have a mixture of top-down and bottom-up. So we can somehow find a balance. And that's why the discussion was important. You see, there's always going to be some topic of communal living, because we're always living together, right? But we have to somehow take time to discuss and then find a way to balance those points and not be extreme on those points. And that's why living together can from the very start, from the youth part, to foment this kind of discussion culture. Does anyone disagree with that?
I want to add this point that I think it's not so clear. A few of us see communal living as sharing the yard and the sauna and the laundry room, which I think we all do without blinking an eye in Finland. And whereas sharing a kitchen is a bit hard. But the future, at least from what I've been looking at architecture and urbanism the last few years all over the world, is heading to the boundary between your private flat and your public yard being very, very blurry. And so suddenly you're not going to be, at least if a lot of young, enlightened social scientists and designers work together, you're going to get cities where you maybe don't even know which is actually your main door to your flat. And okay, you'll have your own room, but then there's just like gray zones of like very, very private, just your flat, very public, everybody in the street, whatever. And then where does the kitchen come? I think those are very crucial questions. Like we can talk about scale and certain levels of like I won't let in somebody I don't really have a lifestyle like sort of agreement with into my kitchen and to use my pans, but well, who decides these basically? And that's also, I think, very problematic. We've been trying to, even within Helsinki and like certain areas, like even free choice isn't really free. Like you can still let anybody in, and they're still not going to be able to afford anything in Jätkäsaari that's being built right now. You can still say like it's all free, and still you maybe like 90% of Helsinki.
That's a very important topic. You cannot choose. If I don't like, for example, to live in a place where the window is very small, that many people like. But I don't have a choice probably here in Finland, because if I do, first of all, the rent's going to be much higher because the heating costs higher, or the space is, everyone knows, right? So there is actually, who is deciding that? It's not we as I want to live in that condition. It's already established by the market prices. So it's a top-down decision. And it is where you
I have to change my chair.
Architects and myself, I'm an interior architect, so we miss a lot of understanding about class and society, and how this kind of like the things that how you create, like for example a person who is living in their home and like walking in the street, they also express a lot about where they want to belong and what they want to do, and these kind of things like when the ones who are planning the structures, that they don't know about the structures, then it's like it's not working. Like for example, I cannot, like if I look like a person who is an artist, and then I want to ask an like office building that okay, maybe I could hang out here in the evenings. It's not just that I look the wrong way when I walk in, although if I had a suit on, the kind of the structure that in the evening the office building has to be empty is part of the kind of the structure that makes it like look weird.
You're touching a very fundamental point that I forgot probably to talk about, and that's why also the reason I talk about these things and do this work is because of that experience. For example, in Switzerland, when I was working there for 1 year, my daily, as a team leader, my task was the boss came in with the plot of land and said, here's the land, this is the owner, you have 1 week, make money out of this. That's the task, right? So what you need to do is, if you have a week, 6 days is going to be to just make calculations, like market analysis, laws, what much can I build, what's the trend, mixed residential office, and then lastly you took a look at surroundings on Google Maps, probably, you're not even going there, no way, and make a design that you somehow feel proud of, and try to convince that to the landowner. He comes to a meeting, he looks only at the numbers, he takes a glimpse of the building, and says, why is this facade, it must be expensive. Oh, but you need this, you try to make it, these rooms are too big. Oh yeah, okay, so cut it out. That's always going to be, that's the daily life of an architect, at least on a team leading position. Then the team leader goes to the other architects and says, we decided like this. So the people who are normally doing the CAD work, or the like 90% of the architects, they don't have no idea. They thought we really thought this through, and this is the best design possible. Let alone the citizens who think that we actually made the best possible solution. No, we have a lot of limited time. Like we just have a week to design a building because that's how we maximize our profit. And that's all we are designing the cities about. This is very scary if you think about it. Right? We're not thinking about like who's the community, what's going to happen. We're just thinking, I know this guy, I'm going to give him a call, I can build one more storage and make more money. That's what we're concerned about. Now, if you agree that this is the way we want to lead our society into as designers and as citizens, then we either accept it or everyone should do something about it.
Like exactly what I was thinking when I kind of tried to start to work as an architect, because then actually it's like a box and you need to like make the box cheaper, and you have no influence in that. It's like only the price which a company wants to pay. It's me, and doesn't mean anything else, and no one is like. Of course, like on the architecture can try to, if he or she feels like that, that okay, I want to make this building or interior a little bit better, then it's quite like, yeah, well, let's maybe cut this, cut that, and probably make it looks like something. But then it's really annoying that people don't have an influence on the designing, because actually people always know better what they need there.
Can I say already something that maybe some people already know about this, or influences? Probably some are here from Aalto University, and the new autonomy in the autonomy campus is going to be this new building, which had this participative design process, which I was very critical about and annoyed them pretty much. And I knew what was going to happen, and it did happen. And I know this, and you can see already in the plans. There's a competition, so the architect one proposed this kind of building, right? And with gardens in some like square with gardens and so on. Okay, they won. They are building now. Yeah, of course it's a complex process, but anyhow, they are building. It went over the costs. What do? You cut immediately on things that don't matter so much. Green zones, facade. So there will be no little pockets of green. So there will be only concrete there. So you know already that participative design did not work. Of course not. It will never work like that. That's another big topic. How do you make participative, and also democracy, also in design? First, if you're not an expert, but also if there is no liability on that process, right? So, and if you do it, even if you do it, it takes a lot of time. So how can you fit that into the normal market situation that you ask people around? And then there's a lot of manipulation. I mean, the fact that I just say to you guys, there are 3 choices for this design. The first one, my favorite, and then the rest one is, this happened to me many times in France. And the politician, that everyone believes in him, says that. And I was like, what did you just do? And like, of course they chose the first option. So you can manipulate all these issues very much. So we need to be aware of all these things and try to find always, there's not one answer for this. That's what I'm trying to say here, right?
With that tonight, I was kind of wanting to draw attention back to the image that was chosen for the seminar about not building.
Yeah.
And with this idea of like non-homogeneous design, I wanted to know about your idea from communal living about how that accounts for permanence. Like, are these structures in your head like a permanent homogeneous reproduction, or are they flexible? Do they change considering family sizes? Like, just in your sort of conception of what this society looks like.
Well, I'm not planning a society, but I'm doing this project called School, which is a renovation of a school, and many things that I've learned in the process of as an architect fit into it. There is never a clear answer. People are very different in spaces or in places. For example, the modular part. If you leave it too open, people will start, what? I'm going to live without rails in the stairs? No, it's just for you to understand. It's modular. But so you have to make some suggestions. So too much freedom, and people also don't like it. We did that before, and we called it Chameleon Project. We had this matrix. You could choose everything, and you go from one to another. It's super amount of work. At the end, it was like 90% the same, and so a waste of time. In all of this, what one needs to think about is also in the project proposal and also in the living of the societal planning is the fact that you need to have a multitude of choices, to be adaptable, and not to, okay, let's just clean it up and make new. And that I'm totally against. That's why I call it renovation as one of the three principles. And if you take examples as cities like even New York, but Venice as the best case, like you added to what was there. There was always going to be some things that don't work, you take it out. But making tabula rasa of something, it's always a bad idea. That's one of the things I strongly believe in. Does it fit to your question? Or? Any, yeah.
Could you say how, like when you build, like when buildings are constructed, can you say how capital intensive it is and how much of it is?
How much?
How much? Well, I understand that building constructions or constructing buildings is quite capital intensive in a lot of my field. Could you say how much of it is invested in design, like how, thinking out what you're actually building?
Yeah, well, it differs from countries to countries. Some places it's really low, can be even 3%. Many places the fee of an architect is 10%, even 15%. It depends on the country. But that wouldn't be so. It's not so alarming, that part. What's more alarming, in my view, is the investor part. If you are building a project, if you are building something, you always have to count for the profit. How much money? What is the return rate of that investment? So, for example, if in Switzerland, I'll give you a number, 4 million, more or less 4 million francs building, he would get his money back in more or less 4 or 5 years. And that's what worried me always. So when you're paying a flat, you're not paying the materials, the construction of it. You're paying actually a return investment of 4 years. Then you pay a profit. So a building normally has a life of 30 years. So that's also something that normally people do not know. The concrete we are using in our buildings has a life expectancy of 30 years. Which means it's going to need renovation or be demolished. So we're not building up that sense of renovation. We're just, again, fast and furious. Just do it and make it new, and people do not notice there's a 5 to 10 year guarantee of the building. After that, that's good, I made my profit. And then the return rate, 4 to 5 years, and then you start to make money for the next 15, 20 years. And so when you're paying your rent or paying your flat, you're paying that part. That's what's bothering me.
Okay, so is there any point in designing the buildings if the only if the focus is on return on investment? Is there any point in designing good buildings if the focus is on return on investment?
No, that's exactly the point. You would build much better buildings if you would not have this return. Because there would be not the pressure, I want to have it fast. Because if I make bigger rooms, it's going to be more expensive, and the rents cannot be super high because nobody will get it. So his return will be 10 years. That's the problem. So we make the room smaller.
I think the problem is like.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
But anyhow, go ahead.
Architects all they create because of demand, and not only like economical demand, but it kind of goes together like that economical situation and people's values or how they look upon what is valuable. Like before, when people, like the workers didn't have a lot of money, so they lived in a lot of shared spaces. Then they could see the problems with that, and what you desire is what you don't have. So privacy became desirable, and when they got a little bit of more money, they wanted to get into a private apartment. And now, when the workers are in private apartments, we can see the problems with that. Luxury is shared common space, and deeper values like taking care of your environment and stuff like that. So architects is kind of wanting to create that, because what the majority wants is usually what the individual wants as well, and so the people with money will get what the majority wants, and we always want what we don't have.
Can I add? It's blurry what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
But if I can help, the desire thing is a very important part, and it started. It hasn't been there at all. It started in the 40s. The huge campaigns to actually consume more. We had in that period in the USA. There was a problem of the surplus, which capital produces. It produces always too much, but it needs to be consumed. So the absorption of the surplus, which is a topic that David Harvey talks a lot about, David Harvey I recommend a lot to read, has to be, people have to consume. How do they consume if they have everything they need? Well, they have to create new needs, and therefore create desires. One classical one, and that's where it started. Advertising started there. And the first advertising stunt that this guy did, I'm forgetting his name, was to promote cigarettes for women. Like cigarettes used to be a man thing, right? You smoke, and women, no. But what he did was just to put in a parade, which was going to be filmed, 3 women, like charming women, elegant, like emancipated, smoking in public, and everyone was shocked. But it worked as emancipated, strong woman, smoking, I'll do the same. Desired, copycat. And we're doing this for the last 70, 80 years. So we're creating desires. Architecture is just going along that. If you see the museums, the massive amount of museums created, Guggenheim drama that was here the last 4 years, which I was totally against. And you see Amos Anderson, in China, it's almost every week one new opening. It's not because they have a lot of things to exhibit and they were in the basement. No, it needs to be consumed. The cities grow because they have to take that surplus. So new markets are always to come, and that's the big problem nowadays. The markets are running out. It used to be, let's go to South America, let's go to Africa, and build there. Everything's already pretty much built, so now we have to even consume more or either build more and leave empty spaces.
And I wanted to point out with this previous comment of yours that with this houses that the lifespan is something like the concrete is something like 30 years. I think that's also part of this that they are built so fast so the concrete doesn't have proper time to like dry out and so on. So that's why they also like get like or they need renovations also faster. So that's also part of this like capitalist cycle that you need you build something fast and sloppy, and then you have to again use the resources. You can take the houses down and you can build new ones. So it's also.
I can comment on that. Well, because concrete is a big topic. I hate this.
Yeah.
Civil engineering. I have nightmares thinking about concrete. And it's from the engineering perspective, it's not about that. It's just about the costs. To make a C30, which is the one is 325, which is the one is used, it's quite low cost. But if you want to make a dam, like a bridge, you use C50s or even special ones, which are far more expensive to do. They use more rare materials and much cleaner ones. If you would know what garbage is inside in concrete, you would never use it. Never. It's ashes of everything.
Yeah.
You were saying something?
Yeah. I was told that it's possible to use it instead of concrete. You grow this mycelium for mushrooms, and you pour water on it, so it kind of behaves like concrete. You can make bricks out of it. But I wanted to know in what time span do they decompose? Because you grow it, it's a natural resource, and also it's really, really cheap to produce.
Those things are always the main problem is the scale. It's like those bacteria that make fuel. And they can make fuel like very little amount, and if you want to scale it up, it's impossible. It's literally impossible. You would have to have 2 herds of bacteria to produce amount of It's the same with those situations. Let's not forget, concrete was a fantastic thing. I'm not saying bad about these things. Concrete enabled us to build bridges that were unthinkable back then, dams and so on. But of course, then they use it for housing, and they started to make flat roofs. It was a big mistake. We'll start to now go back to those mixed ideas. Again, it's the fact that we should not radicalize any kind of solution that we have. It's the same thing now with the climate change and so on. No, let's all forget nuclear power and now go to wind power. No, let's make a mix. Let's balance out of those things. And easy assumptions are done on that, like everything is bad, and then a new technology comes in. That's just, I think, therefore, what I'm pushing all the time here is that when we are discussing this, it's very important to have that thesis and antithesis thing aware that we should always listen, even much better the other parts from perspective. Especially the expert and the non-expert thing is a very dramatic thing in democracy. And a lot of debate went through thousands of years on this. And we still haven't found out a solution for this. But it's very, very important to talk about it and to discuss more. Anyone else? We should stop soon, right?
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to say about this concrete and capitalism. I also like to blame capitalism on everything, because in Finland, like most of this like horrible concrete bullshit schools and stuff, they've been very social democratic public projects that have.
Sorry, but social democratic is also capitalism.
Yeah, I know, like, and also all this rotting concrete in both Soviet countries. Do you understand what I mean? Like,
also capitalism. Or only that the owner is the state, not the...
Let's not go there. But like, what I'm just saying is that it's not only capitalist logic that builds this like crappy concrete housing. It's many kind of also this different kind of states that produce this kind of bullshit buildings which don't last and which will rot, and then the children will have allergies in the schools when they're coughing out this rotting concrete.
Well, but then again you have, for example, in the 80s they used to have all this new material for insulation or for the heating. This is great, and then we found out, oops, this is cancerogenous. But there's a big solution that should have been maybe tested in or maybe should have been implemented in a softer way. Anyone has a final question?
Yeah. What if architects just one day decided that they are responsible of all these things because of course normally architects are the ones who have really great ideas and they are also really ideological when they go studying and they really want to make something good, but then because of the structures and the capitalism and the things that cannot come true are always happening. And then you are just kind of in a moment where you have to do things that you cannot agree, but you still do it because you have to, because you are working in a company and you have a salary and you would get kicked out from the company if you didn't do it. But if everybody would just one day say that, okay, I will just do things that are good, what would happen?
It would be chaos. I would not trust any architect to decide. No, it has to be, again, a mix of different opinions.
Yeah.
And if you look into the teaching method, which I am very well aware, here is not so bad, especially in Australia, it's ridiculous. And they impose you what design it is to be done, and USA also. And that's the reason I was kicked out of that as a teacher. You are taught many things in architecture that are completely absurd. You're not taught how to think about numbers, first of all. No, that's for the engineers. Okay, it's good to have a dissociated head of that, but you also think, and that's the most dangerous part, you are taught into a star system. Of the architect who has the biggest dick, in that metaphorical sense, right? Who's going to make the biggest one and the most wow one? Zaha did. The star system is corrupting the whole principle of having a good living space. The architecture is based on a good photo nowadays, right? You open here, wow, what a building! Yeah, the $1 million shot, as we always say. We pay rivers of money to renders. We used to pay $4,000 for one picture, per picture rendering. That would be good, just to advertise it. And this is a low-scale project. So that defines the project. Nothing to do with the livability. And there is one architect that I think anyone should read, and even not architects, but everyone. Juhani Palasma, which is a Finnish architect, very old, and he has this approach, the eyes of the skin. You have another sense that when you enter a building, you immediately perceive if it's harmful, warm, cozy, or bad, or aggressive. You don't have to rationalize it. You're not thinking of it. You immediately, in 1 millisecond, you know exactly. So it's all this 3D thing that we have, spatial beings that we have, with all the senses together, the smell, the eyes and the ears, and even the skin, the warmth, playing together defines the space. How can you have that in a photo? And then that defines our students, and those will propose things to the city, and those will decide again. So we have a very hard task ahead, right? Well, thank you very much. I hope you understood something. I hope it was interesting for you.